The wind over Red Mesa carried a sharp, metallic bite that morning, one of those desert winds that whispered of trouble before a man even stepped outside. Silas Redford felt it the moment he pushed open the heavy oak door of his ranch house. The sky glowed a bruised shade of purple dawn still wrestling with the night, and every instinct in him tightened like a rope pulled too fast. Something was wrong. He stood at the top of the porch steps, boots planted wide, scanning the vast stretch of sandstone and brittle brush that made up the eastern edge of his property. A rich rancher like Silas had no shortage of reasons to stay alert: cattle thieves, railroad men, the occasional lost traveler. But this feeling was different. He'd lived long enough to recognize the scent of danger drifting in the wind, even before he knew its shape. Then he heard it. A scrape, a drag, a thin, wavering cry swallowed by the wind. Silas's hand went to the revolver on his hip. The sound came again, clearer now, like wood scraping rock, like something too heavy being pulled by someone too small. He stepped off the porch and crossed the yard with long strides, boots sinking into red dust. The cold bit at his face sharp enough to sting the eyes, but he didn't slow. The real chill came from somewhere deeper, somewhere he'd tried to bury alongside the memories of Santa Fe, of courtrooms, of a life gone wrong. As he crested a slight rise, he saw the movement. At first it looked like a bundle of cloth tangled in sagebrush. Then the shape shifted, revealing the outline of a boy, small, thin, barely upright. He staggered forward, gripping a rope tied to two apple crates, jury-rigged into a makeshift sled. The crates scraped along the dirt, leaving a trail carved into the earth like claw marks. Silas's breath caught. The boy couldn't have been older than 10. His face was ash-pale, lips cracked and blue. His coat was torn at the seams, stuffed with old newspaper for warmth. His boots were so worn Silas could see skin through the splits. But it was the crates that made Silas's chest tighten. He quickened his pace. "Hey, kid," Silas called out. "Hold on, you hear?" The boy tried to lift his head, tried to answer, but his knees buckled and he pitched forward into the dust. Silas reached him just before his face met the ground, catching the small, shaking body in his arms. "Easy now," Silas murmured, lowering him gently. "You're safe." The boy's eyelids fluttered. He tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Silas forced himself to look at the crates. Inside, wrapped in rags and thin blankets, were two infants, twins, a boy and a girl. The girl's tiny chest rose in shallow, faltering breaths. The boy barely made a sound at all. Their skin was the color of cooled ash, their lips tinged purple from the cold desert night. "Dear God," Silas breathed. "How long have you been dragging them?" The boy swallowed, trying to wet his cracked throat. His voice came in a whisper that didn't sound like it belonged to a child. 3 days, maybe 4. Silas felt the bottom drop out of his chest. No food. The boy shook his head weakly. No fire, another shake. Silas wrapped his coat around the boy and lifted him into his arms. The child weighed almost nothing. A stiff breeze could have carried him away. Silas looked down at his face, dusty, exhausted, and yet determined. The look of someone who'd walked through hell because turning back wasn't an option. "What's your name, son?" Silas asked. "Tomas," the boy whispered. He clutched at Silas's shirt with a trembling hand and pulled him closer until their foreheads almost touched. "They killed my papa," Tomas rasped. "Then my mama. They burned my mama alive for what's buried under our land." His voice cracked on the word burned. Silas felt something deep inside him shift, an old wound pressing against a fresh one. "They're coming for us," Tomas added, voice thin as smoke. "Please, don't let them take my brother and sister." Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp in Silas's arms. Silas didn't hesitate. He hooked the crate's rope over his shoulder, lifted Tomas higher on his chest, and started back toward the ranch house. Each step hammered the same thought deeper: whoever had done this wasn't finished. And the only thing standing between these children and the men who'd burned their parents was him. Inside the ranch house, the heat from the hearth washed over Silas as he carried Tomas to the sofa. Elias Boone, tall and strong despite his years, hurried from the kitchen the moment he saw the boy in Silas's arms. "Lord Almighty," Elias muttered. "Where'd you find him?" "East Ridge," Silas said, already kneeling beside the crates. "Get blankets, hot water, whatever you can." Elias didn't ask more. He moved with the brisk certainty of a man who'd seen death and refused to let it take anyone else under his roof. Silas unwrapped the infants carefully, rubbing warmth into their tiny chests. Memories flickered through him, his own daughter, long gone now, slipping from him like smoke. He forced the images aside and focused on the twins. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Both of you, stay." The little girl whimpered, barely a sound, but enough to make Silas breathe again. The boy followed a moment later with a weak cry. "They're alive," Elias said, kneeling beside him with warm cloths. "But barely." Silas looked over at Tomas, unconscious on the sofa, face still pinched with fear even in sleep. "What could drive a child out into the desert with 2 babies?" Elias whispered. Silas didn't answer, because he already knew. Men driven by greed. Men with power. Men who thought land and gold were worth more than a family's life. Men he'd once fought in courtrooms back in Santa Fe and lost everything trying. Elias placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. "Whoever did this, they won't stop." Silas nodded, jaw tight. "They'll come," he said. "And when they do, they'll expect to find these children unprotected." He lifted Tomas's limp hand and squeezed it gently. "But they'll be wrong." Outside, the wind shifted stronger now, carrying dust across the plains in long red streaks. It howled against the ranch walls like something hungry. Silas looked toward the window, eyes narrowing. The boy had spoken of murder, of burning, of greed buried beneath land. Old debts, old ghosts, old enemies wrapped in new names. He stood slowly. "We need to find out exactly who's hunting them," he said. "And why?" Elias nodded. "Where do we start?" Silas glanced back at Tomas, at the twins bundled near the fire, at the dust-heavy horizon beyond the glass. "With the truth," he said. "Because the truth, once unearthed, always brought trouble. And in Red Mesa, trouble traveled fast. And before the next sunrise, it would be riding straight toward them." The room was quiet, except for the pop and crackle of firewood in the hearth. Outside, the wind had settled, but the dust still clung to the windows like old regrets. Inside, the ranch house smelled of boiled milk sage and faintly of gun oil. Silas sat at the long dining table, the boy's boot in his hands. It was cracked down the side, the sole nearly peeled off. He had noticed it when Elias helped strip Tomas's frozen clothes, and something about how tightly the boy clutched at his boots had nagged at him. Silas turned it over and felt a lump stitched inside the lining. Carefully, he slit the seam open with a pocket knife. A folded piece of parchment dropped onto the table. He picked it up gently and unfolded it. Crude but detailed. A hand-drawn map. The Gutierrez Ranch sat clearly marked with boundaries drawn in tight black ink. A rocky ridge to the west, a spring to the north, and in the center, just below a cluster of mesquite trees, a large red X. Silas ran his fingers over it. That part of Arizona was rich in copper, sometimes silver, but gold. That was rare, at least this far out from Prescott. And still, something about the drawing, about the way the X had been inked, 3 times over, caught in his throat. Behind him, Thomas stirred on the couch, letting out a soft groan. Silas folded the map and slipped it into his vest pocket before walking over. The boy opened his eyes, confused, then fearful, sitting up too fast. "Easy," Silas said, crouching beside him. "You're safe now." Tomas blinked. His mouth opened, then closed again. "My brother, my sister." "They're alive," Silas said, "sleeping over by the fire. I warmed milk for 'em. Not much, but they took it." The boy let out a shaky breath and leaned back, tears threatening but held in check. Silas waited. After a long pause, Tomas said, "Where are we, Red Mesa?" "My ranch. You dragged those babies across hell to get here." "I remembered what Papi said," Tomas whispered. "He said, if anything happens, find Silas Redford. He owes us everything." The words hit Silas like a sucker punch to the gut. He sat back on his heels and studied the boy. Thin arms, hollow cheeks, eyes too old for that young face. Yet beneath all of it, a spine of steel. "I knew your father," Silas said quietly. "He was a stubborn, honest man, maybe the last of his kind." Tomas nodded, tears spilling down now. He didn't want to sell. The railroad offered him money a lot. But he said it wasn't about money. Said that land was for me and the twins. That the gold belonged to our family. Silas's eyes narrowed. "He told you there was gold." The boy sniffled. "He said he found a vein under the west ridge near the dry arroyo. Drew it on a map. Said if anything ever happened to him, I was to get the babies and bring it to you." Silas stood and crossed to the table. He pulled the map from his pocket and spread it out. This the one Tomas looked, then nodded. "That's it." Silas felt his throat tighten. "You've got a hell of a memory, son." "I had to." Footsteps creaked across the wooden floor. Elias entered from the back hall, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I figured you'd be up," he said. "Fire's holding. Babies are still sleeping." Silas gestured for him to come closer and handed over the map. Elias whistled low. "You think it's real?" "I think it's enough to get someone killed," Silas said. "And it already has." Tomas looked up. There was a man. After the fire, I saw him on the ridge, standing real still, just watching. Then he threw something, a bottle glass with fire inside. Hit our wagon. Silas's jaw locked. A Molotov. "He didn't run," Tomas said. "He watched it burn, watched Mama scream. She shoved me out before the flames reached me, told me to hide, told me to run." "You saw his face?" Elias asked gently. Tomas nodded. He was pale, sharp nose, fancy coat. He smiled when the fire got big. Silas had a name in his mouth before he even realized it. Burnett Caldwell. Tomas looked up. "You know him?" Silas sat down slowly, suddenly feeling the weight of every mile between him and the life he'd tried to forget. "He's a lawyer, railroad man, ruthless. Used to work with the Gulf and Western but jumped to Southern Pacific 2 years ago. Last I heard, he was heading up land acquisitions out here." Quietly. "Meaning no one's supposed to know," Elias added. Meaning Silas muttered, "He's doing it dirty." Tomas clenched his fists. "He forged papers, said he was our guardian now, that he had the right. You saw the papers? No. But Mama did. Said they had Judge Knox's seal, but her name was wrong. Spelled like a stranger." Silas exchanged a look with Elias. That wasn't just suspicion, that was a pattern. "You think he's trying to steal the land for the railroad?" Elias asked. Silas nodded. That gold vein runs through their ranch. The company wants it for a spur line they're building toward Flagstaff. With the mine rights, they could finance half a dozen new routes. But they can't do it if the deed stays with the Gutierrez kids. So he killed the parents. And now he's coming for the rest. Tomas's voice cracked. He'll come here. Won't he? Silas stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the dust-colored horizon, where morning light stretched across the empty miles like a warning. Yes, he said. He will. He turned back, face hard as hammered stone. But he's not getting you. Or them. Not now. Not ever. Tomas looked down, embarrassed by the tears on his cheeks. Silas knelt beside him again. You did the impossible, Tomas. You got them here alive. You kept them breathing. That's more courage than most men ever show in their lives. Tomas swallowed. I didn't know what else to do. You did exactly what needed doing, Silas said. Outside, the wind had picked up again, a dry rustle against the adobe walls. Elias folded the map and handed it back. What now? Silas stood. Now he tucked the map into his vest. We figure out just how far Caldwell's reach goes, who he paid, who he forged, and we start pulling that thread. He looked down at Tomas. Your papa left more than land behind. He left a fight, and you just handed it to me. Tomas met his eyes. You'll help us, Silas put a hand on his shoulder. I'll do more than help, son. I'll make them regret they ever touched your family. Behind them, one of the twins whimpered, then settled again. Elias crossed to the fire, adjusting the blanket. Silas's voice came low, heavy, with the promise of old debts being called in. It starts with Caldwell. But we're not stopping until we find every man who signed his name to this. And from that moment forward, Red Mesa was no longer just a ranch. It was a line in the sand. The desert had a way of silencing the past, burying it beneath years of dry wind and red sand until even memory started to feel like myth. Silas Redford had counted on that when he came to Red Mesa 10 years ago. He thought if he worked hard enough, built enough fence line, branded enough cattle, the silence would finally settle inside him. But that was before a boy dragged 2 babies into his life and said the name Caldwell. Now the past wasn't buried. It was riding toward him. Elias was outside chopping wood when Silas stepped onto the porch, the worn leather folder from his study tucked under one arm. He hadn't opened it in years, not since the day he walked out of the courthouse in Santa Fe for the last time his law license burned and scattered to the wind. You sure you want to open that box again? Elias asked without looking up. Silas didn't answer right away. He sat down on the edge of the porch, laid the folder across his knees, and stared at the name stamped into the front Redford S. Inside were court transcripts, client notes, signed affidavits, his entire legal life in a bundle of yellowed paper. Found the Gutierrez file, Silas said. 12 years old. Civil dispute over mineral rights. Railroad tried to pressure Raphael into selling his land. Elias leaned on the axe. And he came to you. Silas nodded. Wasn't even supposed to take the case. I was junior counsel back then. But I believed him. Fought for him. Got him a win. So why's that folder look like it still burns your hands? Silas opened it and pulled out a letter. Because the win didn't last. After the ruling, the company came back harder. Sent Caldwell. Quietly. They harassed Raphael's family. Stalled the water permit. Cut their fence lines. I filed complaints. Got ignored. Then they filed countersuits. All of them aimed at me. Elias sat on the step beside him. That's when you lost your license, Silas laughed without humor. Technically, I surrendered it voluntarily. The judge called me a liability to the bar. Said I'd crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. You did it for the right reasons. That didn't matter to them. The wind shifted. A hawk circled high above the cattle fields. The morning sun seemed harsh and white. Elias glanced toward the house. That boy said Caldwell had court papers with Judge Knox's name on them, yeah. Think he forged 'em. I'd bet this ranch on it. Silas tucked the folder under his arm again and stood. I'm heading into town. Elias raised an eyebrow. You planning to talk to the judge? No, Silas said. I'm planning to talk to Lena. The general store in Red Mesa wasn't much 4 walls, 1 dusty window, and a counter that doubled as a post office. Lena Nez ran it alone. She was smart, quiet, and sharp as a knife beneath the surface. Before the war, she'd been a scout for the Union Army guiding officers through Navajo country. Now she ran the only place in town where gossip moved faster than telegrams. When Silas pushed through the door, she didn't look up right away. She was weighing beans for a customer, a young Navajo woman with 2 toddlers tugging at her skirt. Mr. Redford, Lena said as the bell above the door jingled. Thought you were hiding out this week, was Silas said, taking off his hat. Then trouble came knocking. The other customer gave him a quick glance and left with her paper sack. Lena waited until the door shut before speaking. Let me guess. Burnett Caldwell. Silas raised his eyebrows. You heard already? This is a store, Silas, not a church. People talk. He leaned against the counter. What do you know that he's back in Arizona working for Southern Pacific now? Been buying up parcels all around Flagstaff and Winslow. Quiet like he don't want headlines, but noisy enough if you know what to listen for. You ever seen him out this way? Lena nodded. Week ago. Came in for water and telegram paper. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Who was he with Deputy Marshal Brody? And a clerk I didn't recognize. Silas cursed under his breath. You think he's got Knox in his pocket? Lena asked. I think if we don't move fast, he'll have the whole damn territory bought and paid for. She studied him for a long moment. I'll get you what you need, she said finally. I've still got connections. I'll see what's moving between here and Fort Defiance. Might even know a telegrapher who's been keeping transcripts. Silas nodded, grateful. Thank you, Lena. Don't thank me yet, she said. Caldwell plays rough, and he doesn't lose. Silas pushed off the counter and headed for the door. You can hide in this desert all you want, Silas, she called after him. But the past never forgets. He stopped in the doorway. I'm not hiding anymore, he said quietly. Back at the ranch, Tomas sat on the floor, beside the twins' cradle box, gently feeding them from a tin cup filled with goat's milk and molasses. Elias had cut the milk with water, but it was enough to keep them strong. Tomas barely looked up when Silas returned. Where'd you go, Town? Silas said. Talk to someone who might help us. The boy nodded, eyes locked on the twins. Silas sat beside him, back against the wall. Your father, Silas said after a while. He was braver than I ever gave him credit for. He always said people like us don't get to be brave, Tomas replied. We just have to survive. Silas looked at him carefully. You don't believe that, do you? I did. Tomas's voice was quiet. Until now. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a wrapped package. He set it on the floor between them. Inside was a small revolver, cleaned and oiled, and a box of shells. Elias says you've got a steady hand, Silas said. Figured it's time you learned how to use it right. Tomas stared at the gun. Silas didn't push him. You don't have to become a killer. But you need to be someone they can't walk over. Tomas slowly reached for the weapon and nodded. Outside, the sun was starting to lower, turning the sky to copper. Silas stood again and looked toward the mesa in the distance. "We'll need allies," he said. "People Caldwell hasn't bought yet." Elias stepped into the room, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Then we better start riding." And with that, they began to gather the pieces of an old war one that never truly ended. Not when men like Caldwell still believed that land and blood were theirs for the taking. Late afternoon light slanted through the windows, warm but thin, like it knew better than to get too comfortable in this part of the world. Inside the house, Silas stood at the table examining a letter Lena had passed to him that morning. The envelope bore no return address, just a seal he hadn't seen in a decade, the twisted initials BK belonging to Judge Randall Knox. The judge had once called Silas a dangerous idealist. That was before Knox got cozy with the railroads and started signing land transfers like they were birthday cards. Silas laid the letter flat. The language was slippery, all legal gloss and polite venom. But the message was clear. The custody and property rights of Tomas Gutierrez and his siblings have been provisionally reassigned until a proper guardian is instated. Silas exhaled through his nose. "They've already started." Elias looked up from where he was reloading cartridges. "Papers worse. They're legal papers." Tomas stepped into the room, brow furrowed. He looked different now, still thin, still worn, but something had settled in him. His eyes didn't dart like they used to. He stood straighter. "They're coming, aren't they?" he asked. Silas nodded. "Soon." Just then, hooves thundered across the yard. Elias was at the window in 2 strides. "We've got riders." Silas grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch as 4 men on horseback approached, led by a tall figure in a dark blue coat and polished boots, Burnett Caldwell himself. Redford Caldwell called as he dismounted. "Didn't think I'd find you playing nursemaid." Silas rested the rifle on the porch rail, casual but deliberate. "Didn't think you'd be dumb enough to come uninvited." Caldwell smiled. "You know I like to do things proper. So here I am with proper paperwork. Court-authorized guardianship transfer and an enforcement notice signed by Judge Knox himself." He pulled a leather folio from his saddlebag and held it up. "This paper says those children belong to me." Silas didn't move. "This paper's not law," he said loud enough for Tomas to hear inside the house. "It's a bullet dressed in ink." Caldwell's grin faded. "You want to challenge it?" he asked. "Because if you do, you'll be challenging the judge, the courts, the railroad. And that's a war, Silas. I've been in worse." Caldwell stepped forward, face losing its charm. "You're harboring minors. You've got 48 hours to hand them over. After that, we stop asking." Silas didn't blink. "Then you better bring more men." Caldwell leaned close. "I will." He turned, mounted his horse, and rode out with the others, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Inside the house felt like it was holding its breath. Tomas was standing by the cradle box, fists clenched. "I heard what he said." Silas nodded. "Good. Are we going to let him take us?" Silas stared at the boy a long moment. "Not a chance." He poured coffee into a tin cup, sat at the table, and unfolded the papers Caldwell had left behind. They were clean copies, no stains, no smudges, not even a wrinkle. Too clean. Elias hovered behind him. "What do you see?" "The signature," Silas said. Judge Knox's handwriting always looped back too far on his R's. This one doesn't. "So it's forged," Silas nodded slowly. "If I had 5 minutes in a real court, I could prove it. But that won't stop Caldwell from coming back." Tomas sat down across from him. What will Silas looked between him and Elias? We make it so damn hard for them to come through that gate they rethink who they're messing with. They spent the rest of the evening working. Elias set traps near the property line tripwire alarms and sharpened spikes in the tall grass. Tomas helped secure shutters and reinforce doors. Silas climbed the roof to post a signal lantern, just in case they needed to call for help from neighboring ranchers. Lena arrived just after sundown, wrapped in a poncho and carrying a small bundle. Got something, she said, slipping inside. One of my cousins at the wire office in Winslow intercepted a telegram meant for Knox. Caldwell's trying to fast-track a land seizure order. He's also requesting a federal marshal. Silas cursed. How long before it goes through? 2 days max. He nodded. Then we've got 2 days to change the story. Elias handed Lena a cup of whiskey. We thinking press public noise, not yet, Silas said. First we need proof, a real signature from Knox to compare. Maybe even pull him into the light. If we can get him to admit he never signed that order. He won't talk, Lena said. Not unless he's scared. Then we scare him, Silas replied. Later that night, Tomas lay awake on a cot beside the hearth. The twins were asleep, soft breaths rising and falling under knitted blankets. Across the room, Silas sat sharpening a blade. Why do they want our land so bad? Tomas asked in the dark. Silas didn't answer right away. Because gold turns men into monsters, he said finally. And monsters don't stop until someone puts them down. Tomas turned toward the fire. I want to fight. Silas paused his sharpening. You already are. He looked at the boy, saw the set of his jaw, the quiet fury, the grief he carried like armor. You've been fighting since the moment you walked through that dust. Tomas didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes. The next morning, Lena returned with word from a scout near Fort Defiance. Knox was traveling toward Flagstaff, likely to meet Caldwell and finalize the deal. Silas saw opportunity in that. If we can intercept him, he said, catch him without Caldwell nearby, he might break. But that's a long ride, Elias said. 2, maybe 3 days. Then we ride tonight. Lena nodded. You'll need someone who can track and speak his language. Silas raised an eyebrow. You volunteering? I don't do volunteering, Lena said, grabbing her hat. But I hate railroad men more than I hate riding in the dark. Silas looked back at Tomas. You stay here. Watch over the twins. I can help. You already have. That night, as they packed their gear and saddled the horses, the wind picked up again, dry, restless, like the desert knew what was coming. Silas tightened the straps on his saddle and glanced back at the house. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, Tomas was sitting in a chair with a shotgun across his lap. Elias stood beside him. You sure about this? He asked. Silas nodded. If we don't bring the truth to light, Caldwell's lies will be the only thing left standing. He mounted his horse. Lena did the same. And as they rode out, under a moonless sky, Silas whispered to himself, not for the first time, God help anyone who tries to touch those kids again. The desert at night was a strange kind of silent, too quiet, to trust too loud with what it hid. Every creak of saddle leather, every rustle of sagebrush sounded like thunder when you were expecting bullets. Silas and Lena rode east under a sky swollen with stars, no moon to guide them, just memory and instinct. Their destination was a ranch tucked near the dry creek beds of La Sangre Pass, a patch of land owned by Ramon Ortega, a man Silas hadn't seen in years. You sure he'll help us? Lena asked, as they dismounted near a thicket of pines just before dawn. He will, Silas said, if I can look him in the eye and prove I'm not the same man I used to be. They tied the horses and approached the property on foot. Ramon's land was a mix of stone and stubborn life, prickly pears, a few cottonwoods, and a weathered adobe house with a green metal roof. The smell of mesquite smoke drifted from the chimney, and somewhere a dog barked once and went silent. Silas stepped forward and knocked twice on the door. No answer. Then a click. A shotgun barrel poked out from the narrow opening. "I don't get visitors this early," came a voice rough as gravel. Silas didn't flinch. "Didn't figure you'd welcome 'em either." A pause. "Redford." "Been a while, Ramon." The shotgun disappeared. The door opened fully, revealing a man with streaks of silver in his hair and sunburned skin dark as molasses. Ramon Ortega hadn't changed much, just a little heavier, a little slower. But his eyes were as sharp as ever. "You got nerve coming here," he said, "after the way you left things." "I didn't come for forgiveness," Silas said. "I came for help." Ramon studied him. "You stood with us once, Silas. Will you stand again now that it's your blood on the line?" Silas looked him straight in the eye. "Yes." Ramon stepped aside. "Then come in. Let's talk." Inside, the air smelled of strong coffee and cooked beans. Lena stayed quiet, letting the two men circle each other like old wolves. Silas laid out everything: Tomas, the twins, the forged papers, Caldwell's threats, the land theft, disguised as law. Ramon didn't interrupt, just poured coffee and listened. Finally, he said, "I warned Raphael years ago that Caldwell was trouble. The man poisons everything he touches." "Same with Knox. You still got your deed papers?" Silas asked. Ramon walked to a cabinet and returned with a folded envelope yellowed at the edges. Signed in front of 2 witnesses and a U.S. Marshal. "I've kept 'em close." Silas took it gently, scanning the seal. "If Caldwell's trying to roll over you next, this could be what stops him." Ramon scoffed. "He's already tried. Sent men out here a month ago. Told me my title was under review. I ran them off, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time." Lena finally spoke. "You got neighbors who'll stand with you?" Ramon nodded. "Some. Not all. Most are scared. Caldwell buys silence fast. But the ones who haven't sold out yet, they're waiting for someone to lead." "Then let's give them one," Silas said. They spent the rest of the morning mapping out land deeds, names of ranchers with clean papers, men and women who'd been bullied but hadn't broken. By midday, Ramon had saddled his horse and was already riding to deliver word. "You gather your names," he told Silas before leaving. "But don't wait too long. Fear spreads faster than fire." By sundown, Silas and Lena were back in the saddle, riding hard toward a canyon trail that led home. The wind was picking up again, cold and sharp. They moved fast, knowing time was now a currency they couldn't waste. Back at the ranch, Tomas had held his post like a soldier. He sat on the porch, shotgun across his lap, eyes never leaving the tree line. When he saw Silas ride in, relief broke across his face, but only for a second. "We had visitors," he said. Silas dismounted, instantly alert. "Who 2 men? Didn't come close. Just watched from the ridge. I loaded the rifle like Elias showed me, but they never tried anything." Elias stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag. "They were scouts, testing the ground." "How long ago?" "Just before dusk." Silas looked toward the horizon, jaw tight. "Then we've got less than a day." Lena turned to Elias. "We need to build out the defense. Reinforce the back fence line and stack sandbags under the porch windows." "I've already started," Elias said. "We'll finish by morning." Silas headed inside to check the twins. They were asleep, small hands curled near their faces, breaths steady. He sat beside them for a moment, just watching, letting the silence soften the steel tightening in his chest. When he rose, he found Tomas waiting in the hallway. "You think they'll come tonight?" Silas shook his head. "Tomorrow. Caldwell plays games, but he's too proud to come in the dark. He'll want us awake when he tries to break us." Tomas nodded. "I want to help, you already are." "No. I want to be there when it happens." Silas studied him. There was no fear in the boy's voice now. Just fire. "All right," he said. "But you stay behind the line. No hero stuff." Tomas cracked a small, tired smile. "Deal." Later that night, Silas stood on the roof scanning the dark with his spyglass. The stars were bright, but the land below was black. Too black. He spotted movement near the old cattle path, a flicker, then gone. He lowered the glass. "They're staging," he muttered. Lena climbed up beside him. "You think Caldwell will lead the charge himself?" "Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, it's coming." She looked out over the land with a kind of reverence. "Funny. I used to scout this area during the war. Back then I was hunting rebels. Now I'm hunting lawyers." Silas didn't laugh. He just kept his eyes on the hills. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Walking away from the law." He thought about it for a long time. Sometimes he admitted, "But I regret more the people I didn't stand up for when it mattered." Below, Tomas was checking the crates where the babies slept. Elias stacked firewood near the porch shotgun leaning on the rail. It was a small army. But it was theirs. Silas turned to Lena. "You ready for tomorrow?" She adjusted her coat, her knife visible at her hip. "Born ready." They climbed down the wind, howling low through the brush. And somewhere out there, Caldwell's men were loading rifles and rolling plans across a table, thinking this was just another land grab. They didn't know yet this land had teeth. The sky cracked open just before dawn, not with rain, but with rifles. The first shot whistled past the barn and struck the old windmill, snapping a blade in two. Metal screamed against metal. Silas, already half-dressed, hit the floor running. "They're here," Elias bellowed from the porch. Lena was at the front window, revolver in hand, calm as sunrise. 3 riders on the north line, more circling from the east. Caldwell's not playing anymore. Silas snatched his rifle and threw on his coat. "Get the kids to the root cellar." "I already did," Tomas said, appearing in the hallway with a rifle across his shoulder. He didn't flinch when another shot rang out and a window shattered behind him. "I locked the hatch." Silas gave him one hard nod. "Then it's us now." The ranch had seen storms before. Drought, cattle sickness, fences cut by drunks or thieves. But this was a siege. Elias had set traps all across the fence lines. Now they began to spring, the thunk of hooves hitting spikewood, the startled brays of horses flung from their riders. A man screamed. Another cursed in pain. But Caldwell's crew kept coming. They weren't hired hands anymore. These were professionals, armed, trained, and paid well to make people disappear without questions. Silas ducked behind the porch post and sighted one through the dust. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. The man fell. "That's one," he muttered. Lena took the west side, firing in bursts, her breath steady, her aim steady. Elias guarded the north gate close to the cattle pens, using the fence as partial cover. Tomas stayed near Silas, loading and reloading his hands, only shaking between shots. He was scared but not frozen. He was choosing his fear, bending it to serve him. You said they'd wait for sunrise, Thomas shouted between gunfire. I was wrong, Silas said. They're desperate. The attack lasted 20 minutes. Then it stopped. Silas crouched low, sweeping the horizon. The dust hadn't settled yet, but no new riders came. No boots hit the gravel. No orders were shouted. Then a white handkerchief waved from behind a scorched wagon. Silas stood slowly, rifle in hand, and walked to the gate. Burnett Caldwell stepped out, brushing ash from his coat. His boots were polished, but one was now streaked with blood that didn't belong to him. You've made your point, he called. Silas didn't respond. Caldwell raised both hands. Let's talk. No. We're past that, Silas replied. Caldwell smirked. Look around. You really think this ends well for you? Silas scanned the field. 4 of Caldwell's men were down. 2 horses limped or bled. And somewhere behind the rocks, others were waiting, likely planning their next move. We're still standing, Silas said. You're bleeding. You won't hold this place forever. I don't need forever, Silas replied. I just need long enough. Caldwell's expression darkened. You know what I hate most about you, Redford? You're the kind of man who talks about principles while standing in a pile of bodies. Silas tilted his head. You're the one who brought the guns. I brought law. You brought cowards. Caldwell took a step forward, voice lowering. You think anyone's coming to save you? This land's already signed over. I've got the marshal's order in my coat. Forged, Silas said. Caldwell froze. Silas smiled. I've got 2 men riding to intercept Judge Knox right now. By the time they catch up, they'll have a real signature. One that doesn't match yours. Caldwell's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Silas stepped forward. You want this land, come and take it. But know this, every step you take, every lie you tell, I'll burn it down around you before I hand over those kids. Caldwell stared at him, eyes burning. You always were dramatic, he said. Silas didn't blink. You always were a coward. Then, with a stiff jerk of his head, Caldwell turned and walked away, boots kicking up dust. Behind him, the surviving riders slowly retreated. They left bodies behind. Blood in the dirt. Spent shells scattered across red sand like seeds that would grow into vengeance. Back inside, Lena was cleaning her gun. Her sleeve was torn, a scrape down her arm, leaking blood. You good? Silas asked. Better than they are, she said. Tomas walked in pale but upright. Are they gone for now? He nodded, but Silas saw it, the tremble in his fingers, the weight of it all settling in his chest. I shot one, Tomas said, eyes down. I think I hit him in the leg. Silas didn't answer right away. He sat beside him and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. You didn't do it for revenge. You did it to protect. There's a difference. Tomas looked up. I didn't want to, but I wasn't going to let them take us. Silas's voice was quiet but firm. That's what makes you a man worth fighting beside. Outside, Elias and Lena dug shallow graves for the fallen. No names, no prayers. Just dirt and silence. That evening they sat around the table again, just like they had after the first night Tomas arrived. Except now there was smoke in their hair bruises on their skin, and something colder lingering in their bones. They'll come back, Elias said, and next time they won't be polite. Silas nodded. That's why we have to move first. Lena leaned forward. You still think you can flip Knox if we can show him the forged papers, maybe. But it's not just him. We need the federal judge in Flagstaff. Someone outside Caldwell's reach. How do we get there in time? Silas pulled out a telegram. I sent a rider from Ortega's camp this morning, one of his sons. Told him to meet us at Twin Creek Junction. From there, we ride straight through. Lena nodded. We'll need to leave by first light. Silas looked at Tomas. You stay here. Guard the twins. I can ride. Silas shook his head. We can't risk you. Not yet. Tomas clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue. That night, Silas walked the perimeter of the ranch alone. He stopped near the graves, hat in hand. I buried too many good men in the name of justice, he said softly. I don't plan to add to that count. As he turned to leave, a voice came from the dark. You won't be alone. Ramon Ortega stepped into view, rifle over his shoulder, dust clinging to his boots. I brought 7 men, he said, and they brought 7 more. Silas smiled, the first real one in days. Then it's time, he said. We ride for the truth, and tomorrow they'd make sure the whole damn territory heard it. The trail to Twin Creek Junction was bone dry and narrow, cutting through gulches lined with jagged rocks and stubborn scrub. The kind of place where only fools, outlaws, or desperate men rode fast. That morning, Silas Redford was all 3. He rode up front, his coat pulled tight against the wind eyes on the path ahead. Behind him came Lena Ramon Ortega and 12 riders' neighbors, ranch hands, old friends with rusted spurs and fresh grudges. Some rode with rifles, others with worn pistols. All rode with purpose. They reached the overlook by mid-morning. Below them, the rail line cut through the basin like a black ribbon. The small depot at Twin Creek sat quiet, except for a puff of steam from a lone engine idling near the water tower. Silas raised his spyglass. A figure stepped off the platform and adjusted his coat. Judge Knox, Silas said, confirming what he already knew. He's early. Lena leaned closer. You think Caldwell's with him? Silas scanned the area. No sign of his men yet, but he won't be far behind. They dismounted and moved down the slope, keeping to the rocks. The wind carried the scent of coal smoke and the metallic bite of dry earth. As they approached the station, Silas signaled for half the group to hold back. Lena and Ramon stepped forward. Knox stood beneath the awning, reading a folded telegram. He looked older than Silas remembered. Thinner, too. Like his guilt had been chewing at him for years, and he hadn't found a way to spit it out. Judge Knox, Silas called. The man looked up, startled. His eyes flicked to the rifle slung over Lena's shoulder, then to Ramon's badge stitched into his vest. Redford, he said stiffly. You're out of jurisdiction. This isn't about jurisdiction. It's about justice. Knox raised an eyebrow. Still speaking in slogans, I see. Silas ignored the jab and pulled out the forged guardianship papers Caldwell had left behind. You recognize this signature? Knox took the paper with a flicker of irritation, then stilled. His brows creased. He turned it over, squinted, then looked up slowly. I never signed this. Silas's voice dropped. That's what I needed to hear. Knox hesitated. Where did you get this from the man who claims he represents your court? Caldwell used this to seize a family's land and custody of 3 children. Knox looked genuinely rattled. He said the father died intestate, that there were no surviving guardians. Silas stepped closer. He lied, and you helped him even if you didn't mean to. Knox took a long breath, then looked away. I didn't know, I swear it. Ramon crossed his arms. You signed the land seizure authorizations, didn't you? I was shown paperwork, official stamps, seals. He had court orders, statements, everything looked legitimate. You didn't verify, Lena asked, her voice cold. Knox's shoulders slumped. He had friends in the territorial office. I assumed. Silas cut in. You didn't want to see the truth. Knox didn't argue. The station agent stepped out, eyeing the group nervously. Train to Flagstaff leaves in 20. You folks boarding Knox looked at Silas. Where are the children now? Safe Silas said. But not for long if we don't stop Caldwell. Knox sighed. If I testify, if I sign a sworn statement, Caldwell will destroy me. He's already destroying families, Ramon snapped. You think your name matters more than theirs. Knox's gaze dropped. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of steam from the locomotive. Then the judge looked up and said quietly, "Where do I sign?" Silas handed him a pen. A moment later, the judge's signature was inked beneath a new affidavit, one that declared the previous guardianship order forged and all related land transfers invalid. Lena sealed it in a leather folder. That gives us leverage, she said. But it's not enough. We need a federal authority. Knox nodded. There's a circuit judge in Flagstaff, Martha Wilson. She's honest, untouched. She'll listen, Silas asked. If I put this in her hands, yes. The whistle blew long and sharp. Knox stepped toward the train. Then a shot cracked the air. The station sign splintered. Silas turned fast, yanking Knox down just as bullets peppered the siding. Riders stormed in from the west, Caldwell's men. They found us, Lena said through gritted teeth. Silas drew his rifle. Cover the judge. Get him on that train. Ramon barked orders and their riders formed a loose line between the platform and the advancing threat. Gunfire echoed through the basin. Silas returned fire, dropping one of Caldwell's men from his saddle. Lena flanked left, covering the train conductor, who was frantically waving for people to board. Ramon pulled Knox behind a crate and shoved him toward the passenger car. You want to fix this at live long enough to testify? Knox nodded, breathless, and stumbled onto the train just as the engine groaned forward. Silas ducked low, firing between the crates. More of Caldwell's men were circling around. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to kill the judge before he got too far. Lena cursed under her breath. They're aiming for the train. We've got to draw them away. Silas whistled sharply and waved his rifle overhead. Hey, come and get it! A few riders turned toward him, guns drawn. One shot grazed Silas's arm. Blood welled quickly, but he stayed upright. Ramon, flank right. Don't let them circle back. The horsemen split, but it was too late. The train had picked up speed, wheels grinding hard against the track. It curved east, pulling Judge Knox out of range. Caldwell's men saw it. One of them screamed in frustration. The gunfire slowed, then stopped. Silas stood panting, blood seeping down his sleeve. The dust cleared. 3 of Caldwell's men lay still. The rest had retreated, vanishing into the red hills. Lena walked over, checking Silas's wound. Clean shot. You'll live. Ramon looked toward the disappearing train. You think he'll go through with it? Silas nodded. He's scared. But not a liar. Not anymore. Lena exhaled. So what now? Silas's voice was gravel. Now we go home. And prepare for the fire Caldwell's going to rain down when he realizes what we've done. They rode out together slower now. Dust in their teeth, smoke in their hair. The kind of tired that only comes from surviving something meant to kill you. But they had what they came for. And as Silas looked over the horizon toward Red Mesa, he knew the war wasn't over, but they'd just turned the tide. The sun was halfway down the sky by the time Silas, Lena, and Ramon made it back to the ranch. Their horses were spent caked in sweat and dust, and every rider wore the kind of exhaustion that had little to do with distance and everything to do with survival. But the ranch was still standing. Barely. Fences had been torn down along the north ridge. Smoke curled up from a burned-out feed shed, and in the center of the yard, Elias stood with a shovel in one hand and blood on his shirt. Silas dismounted fast. What happened? Elias didn't look up right away. They came again. Small group, late afternoon. Everyone safe, mostly. He nodded toward the porch where Tomas sat with his arm in a sling. His face was pale, but he managed a crooked smile when he saw Silas. Just a graze, he called out. Silas exhaled, steadying himself. How many did we lose? None. But we buried 2 of theirs. Ramon shook his head. He's not going to stop. No, Silas said. But neither are we. They gathered around the kitchen table again, maps and telegram slips scattered across the surface like a war room. Lena laid out a folded note from Judge Knox sent via rail courier from Flagstaff. Silas opened it carefully. Handwritten across the page was one line: I've delivered the affidavit. Judge Wilson is reviewing the matter personally. Hold your ground. Silas passed it around the table. Elias nodded. So what's next? Silas looked at each of them in turn. We hold the line. For 48 more hours. Then what? Ramon asked. Then we make it public. Lena leaned forward. You mean expose Caldwell? Go wide, exactly. We bring in the press. We force Wilson's hand by making it too big to ignore. And we show the people of this territory what's really happening to their neighbors. Tomas spoke up from the corner. How do we do that without dying first? Everyone went quiet. Silas didn't answer right away. Then he stood, walked to the sideboard, and pulled out an old wooden box. Inside was a telegraph transmitter, dusty but functional. Lena, he said, how fast can you write a dispatch? She grinned. Faster than Caldwell can shut it down. Within the hour, Lena had composed a letter addressed to the Arizona Sentinel, the largest independent paper between Tucson and Santa Fe. It named names, listed deed numbers, referenced land seizures, and most damning of all, attached a copy of Knox's signed affidavit denouncing the forged documents. Elias hooked the transmitter to the generator, and Lena keyed the message out, line by line, over the wire. Silas stood behind her, watching the needle tap out each letter like a drumbeat. Once this goes out, she said, we can't take it back. I don't want to, Silas replied. When the final click faded into silence, Lena sat back. It's done. They waited. Not long. By dusk, riders arrived, friends Ramon had rallied from the canyon settlements. Old ranchers, young homesteaders, even a few former cavalry scouts. They came armed, weary of being pushed around. Every man and woman who rode in had the same look in their eye: enough. Tomas helped Elias lay out spare rifles and ammo. He moved slower now, favoring his wounded arm, but his mouth never quit. They picked the wrong family to mess with, he muttered, loading shells with his good hand. Silas smiled at that. By firelight, they held a meeting in the barn. Silas stood in the center, hat off, hands calloused and bruised from the road. I ain't gonna give a speech, he said. Most of you already know what we're up against. Burnett Caldwell isn't just trying to take this ranch. He's trying to prove that the law doesn't matter. That justice is for sale. That men like him get to rewrite the rules. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I've spent 10 years trying to forget who I was, Silas continued. Trying to bury the part of me that used to fight back. But the truth is, justice only works if we make it stand for something. He looked at Tomas, then back to the others. Caldwell's coming. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe at dawn. But when he does, he won't expect to find 30 armed people standing shoulder to shoulder. He pointed toward the fence line. He'll expect fear. He won't find it here. The men and women nodded, the kind of silent agreement forged not by words, but by years of being stepped on, by scars that went deeper than skin. Ramon stepped forward. We've got eyes on the ridge. Traps laid. I've got runners ready to break for town if we need reinforcements. Elias added, fire lines are prepped. If they try to burn us out, we'll burn 'em first. Silas clapped him on the shoulder. That's the spirit. Later that night, Silas sat alone on the porch, oil lamp burning low beside him. Tomas joined him, wrapped in a wool blanket. Do you think they'll come tonight? No, Silas said. They want daylight. Makes them feel noble. Tomas smirked. They're cowards. They're dangerous cowards. The boy looked out over the dark fields. I used to think grown men always knew what to do. Silas leaned back in the chair. Some do. Most are just trying not to screw up worse than yesterday. Which are you? Silas thought about it. Then he answered honestly. Depends on the day. Tomas grinned, then went quiet for a while. Then if something happens to you, I'll protect them. Silas turned. What? The twins. Elias. This place, I'll protect it. Silas's throat tightened, but he nodded. I know you will. They sat together in the silence, the stars above as still and sharp as the rifles below. Inside, Lena triple-checked the documents, packing them into a weatherproof satchel. Just in case, she whispered to herself. Outside, Ramon walked the line, checking on each lookout. And far beyond the hills in the dark, Caldwell was already preparing his next move. He wouldn't come alone. He'd bring deputies, mercenaries, maybe even a crooked marshal or two. But he wouldn't be expecting what waited for him here, a ranch ready to bite back. A boy who refused to be afraid. And a man who finally remembered who the hell he was. The fire burned low. The land held its breath. Tomorrow would come like thunder. The morning came with a wind that felt wrong, hot and sharp, like it had been scraped against stone. It rattled loose boards and carried the kind of stillness that only shows up before something breaks. Silas was already outside when the first dust cloud rose over the ridge. He lowered his spyglass. They're coming. Lena stepped up beside him, tying her bandana tight around her neck. How many 20 riders? Maybe more. And 2 wagons behind them. Elias joined them on the porch, holding his shotgun. Wagons. Probably ammo. Or fire, Silas said flatly. Tomas stood just behind the doorway, his sling gone now. He had both hands on his rifle, and while his arm was still stiff, the look in his eyes had hardened. Ramon came from the barn, adjusting the strap on his holster. Everyone's in place. Trenches are manned, East Ridge reinforced. My boys are posted with long guns. Silas gave a short nod. Good. Let's make this one count. By the time Caldwell's men crested the final ridge, the ranch was ready. 31 defenders, all armed, all quiet. A single rider broke off from the group and approached alone. Burnett Caldwell, same polished boots, same black coat, same thin smile like a rattlesnake in a church pew. He stopped at the edge of the yard and raised his voice. Redford. You really gonna make me shout from the dirt like a common thief? Silas stepped out from the porch. Seems fitting. Caldwell's smile twitched. I'm giving you one last chance. Hand over the Gutierrez children, vacate the property, and sign the land release. I'll even let your people walk away. Silas didn't answer right away. Then he said clearly, You're not taking this land, and you're not taking these kids. Caldwell glanced at the barn, the roof, the fence line, seeing shadows moving, barrels glinting. You really think you can win this, right, Redford? No, Silas said. But I can damn sure make you lose. Caldwell stared for a long moment. Then he turned his horse sharply, and raised a hand. The riders behind him spread out. One of the wagons rolled forward. A man climbed down and pulled canvas off the back. Dynamite. Ramon cursed under his breath. He's going to try to blow the line. Silas shouted, "Positions!" The ranch erupted into motion. Shots cracked from the tree line as Ramon's marksmen opened fire. One of Caldwell's men fell before he could light the first fuse. Elias took a sniper position on the windmill tower, his long rifle spitting death across the field. Lena moved like smoke along the fence, firing and relocating, keeping their line mobile. Tomas stayed by the porch, guarding the root cellar. He fired slow and steady, each shot deliberate. Silas took the left flank, riding hard toward the far pasture where the second wagon had peeled off. He flanked the attackers, dropping one with a clean shoulder shot and forcing the rest to scatter. Then came the fire. Someone had thrown a torch onto the back hayshed. Flames burst high, feeding fast on dry timber. Silas turned sharply, yelling, "They're trying to flush us!" From behind the barn, Ramon and two others rushed with buckets, trying to douse the blaze, but the fire had already jumped to the side corral. Smoke curled into the sky, thick and black. Through the haze, Silas spotted Caldwell still on horseback, circling the chaos untouched. Fury bubbled up in his chest. He rode straight at him. Caldwell didn't move. At the last second, Silas veered, dropped from the saddle, and rolled behind a stack of hay bales. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot clipped Caldwell's coat, sent him reeling from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, scrambling for cover as his men returned fire. Inside the ranch house, Lena burst through the door, panting. "The fire's getting close to the cellar. We need to move the twins." Tomas was already halfway down the ladder, wrapping the infants in thick blankets. "I'll take one," Lena said. "You take the other." Back route through the kitchen. They ducked low, weaving through smoke, dodging glass and bullets. Behind them, Elias covered their path, laying down fire from the tower until his rifle clicked dry. He switched to his pistol and kept shooting. In the pasture, Silas crawled toward Caldwell's position. The man was bleeding now, his face streaked with dirt, his polished exterior shredded. "You should have stayed in exile, Redford," Caldwell spat. Silas raised his rifle. "And you should have stayed out of my land." He pulled the trigger, but it jammed. Caldwell lunged, slamming into him. The two men crashed into the dirt, fists flying. Caldwell punched with desperation, but Silas fought like a man with nothing left to lose. He drove an elbow into Caldwell's ribs, then another into his throat. The man wheezed, tried to stand. Silas grabbed a rock and swung hard. Caldwell dropped. Back at the house, the fire had reached the porch. Flames licked at the railings. Lena and Tomas burst through the rear door, twins in arms, coughing. They made it to the creek, laying the babies on damp blankets as smoke poured into the sky. Across the ranch, Caldwell's remaining men saw the tide turning. Too many of their own were down. Too many defenders still stood. They began to retreat. Ramon fired one last warning shot over their heads. "You ride now, or you don't ride ever." Within minutes, the sound of hooves faded into the hills. Silas stood in the yard, bloodied, bruised, smoke in his lungs. Caldwell lay unconscious at his feet. Elias limped toward him, face streaked with soot. "Is it over?" Silas looked around. The barn was scorched, the shed gone. The fence line would need a week of repair. But the house still stood. The children were safe, and Caldwell was in chains. "Not yet," Silas said, "but we just bought ourselves the last chapter." That night, under a starless sky, they buried the dead two of Ramon's men, one of the young homesteaders. Each name read aloud, each grave marked with care. Silas stood by the last headstone and whispered, "They didn't die for land. They died for truth." and in the distance the lights of Flagstaff flickered like a promise waiting to be kept. The train to Flagstaff groaned under its own weight as it crawled through the canyon passes, its steel wheels slicing through sunrise. In the third passenger car, Silas Redford sat alone, hat low over his brow, coat collar turned up against the cold. Opposite him sat Burnett Caldwell, hands cuffed, lips split, eye swollen shut. They hadn't spoken a word since boarding. Outside the window, red cliffs rose like jagged teeth, the morning light crawling slow across the desert floor. Silence pressed against the glass. Lena sat 2 cars ahead, guarding the affidavit folder and the signed statements from Judge Knox and 2 of the surviving homesteaders. Ramon stood in the aisle, arms crossed, boots braced wide. No one got past him. They were headed to meet Judge Martha Wilson, territorial circuit judge known for her sharp tongue and unshakable spine. If there was one person left in Arizona who couldn't be bought or bent, it was her. But Caldwell wasn't worried. Not yet. "You think this is justice?" he finally muttered, his voice rough from the fight. Silas didn't look up. "I built this territory," Caldwell hissed. "While you were out drinking away your name, I was putting in rail lines, making courts function, bringing money into this dust pit." Silas leaned forward slowly, eyes cold. "You didn't build anything. You stole it. Bit by bit. Family by family." Caldwell smirked, blood dried on his teeth. "And they let me. That's the part you hate most, isn't it? No one stopped me. Until now." Caldwell chuckled. "You think one judge's signature can undo all this? I've buried worse than you." "You're not burying anything else," Silas said. "Not with the whole damn press waiting outside that courthouse." That wiped the smirk off his face. At the next stop, a group of journalists, boarded men with ink-stained sleeves and notebooks already open, tipped off by Lena's telegram. Ramon led them through the train, quietly handing them copies of the forged guardianship papers, the land transfer affidavits, and Judge Knox's sworn reversal. Each page was a nail in Caldwell's coffin. The train whistled once more. Flagstaff came into view like a promise held tight in the jaw of the mountains. White buildings edged in red dust, law offices stacked beside saloons and telegraph posts. At the center, the courthouse sat square and immovable. Silas stood pulling Caldwell to his feet. "Let's go." They exited to a small crowd, reporters, a few townsfolk, and one woman standing still in the courthouse steps. Judge Martha Wilson. She was tall, dressed in black with a silver watch chain across her chest and eyes that saw straight through the crowd. "Redford," she called out. Silas tipped his hat. "Judge, you brought me a snake. Thought I'd deliver him personally." She walked down the steps and stood toe-to-toe with Caldwell. "I've read the statements. I've seen the evidence. If even half of it's true, you'll be lucky to die in prison." Caldwell sneered. "You've got nothing admissible." Martha's eyes narrowed. "I've got enough. And a train car full of witnesses." She turned to the deputy at her side. "Take him." Caldwell didn't resist. Not with the cameras snapping. Not with a dozen pens already scribbling his name beside words like fraud, forgery, and land theft. The deputy led him away, shackles clinking like broken pride. Silas exhaled, but it wasn't over yet. Inside the courthouse, Judge Wilson held a closed-door meeting with Silas, Lena, Ramon, and 2 attorneys from the territory's land office. She listened. She asked the right questions. She read every page like it was a puzzle with lives depending on the solution. When she finished, she stood and said, "You've got your case. I'm issuing an injunction against all active land transfers under Caldwell's name pending full investigation. I'm also authorizing temporary custody of the Gutierrez children to remain with Silas Redford until the matter is resolved. Lena blinked. You're trusting him. I've read the full statement from Knox, Wilson said. And I've read the boy's own affidavit. It was handwritten, shaky spelling and all. But it said, Silas kept us warm. He didn't run. He stayed. She looked directly at Silas. That means something to me. He nodded, quietly moved. And the ranch, Ramon asked. Temporarily protected by federal oversight, she said. You'll still need to appear at a formal hearing in 60 days to make it permanent. Silas sighed. We'll be there. She turned to leave, then paused. Caldwell's just the root. The rot goes deeper. Are you ready to keep digging? Lena answered for all of them. We came this far, didn't we? Back at the boarding house that night, Silas stood by the window watching the gas lamps flicker along the street. Lena joined him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. You did it, she said. No, Silas replied. We did it, and we're not done. She raised an eyebrow. Still feel like that man who ran from his name, Silas shook his head slowly. No, not anymore. She took a sip, good, because folks are starting to believe in you, even Tomas. He wouldn't sleep until I told him you were okay. Where is he out back? Showing Ramon how to reload his new pistol. Silas smiled faintly. He's gonna be something. He already is. Silas looked down at the coffee in his hand. You know, I thought, if I kept my head low, stayed quiet, didn't stir the dust, maybe I could outrun who I used to be. And Lena asked. He turned to her voice, quiet but steady. Turns out the only way to outrun your past is to walk straight through it. She didn't reply. She just clinked her mug against his and stayed beside him. Tomorrow they'd head back to Red Mesa. Back to the ranch. Back to the land that had nearly broken them but somehow made them whole. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Silas Redford rested. Not because it was over, but because they were winning. The wind smelled like rain, not the violent kind that tore through the canyons and left fences in pieces. This was the kind that soaked the ground deep and slow, the kind that made the land breathe again. Silas Redford stood at the edge of the pasture, hat in hand, watching the sky shift from bone-dry blue to the first threads of silver. Behind him, the ranch was quiet, but alive. Hammers rang against wood, where Elias and 2 ranch hands worked to repair the scorched east fence. Chickens clucked like they had something important to say. Somewhere in the back, Lena was teaching Tomas how to change a saddle cinch without bruising the horse's ribs. Everything looked normal, but none of it felt safe. Because Caldwell might have been in custody, but the rot he left behind was still rooted deep. His partners, his paperwork, the trails of damage he forged in courtrooms and land offices from Tucson to Santa Fe. Silas hadn't slept much since Flagstaff. Victory didn't feel like celebration, it felt like watchfulness. A breath held, and it wasn't over. Not until the land was fully cleared. Not until Tomas and the twins were legally secure. Not until the truth outlived the lies. He ran a hand along the top rail of the fence, feeling the grain of the new wood. They said you'd fold once the papers were signed, said a voice behind him. It was Ramon, saddle-worn and dusty from a dawn ride. His horse snorted as it cooled beside him. Silas didn't turn. Who said Ramon slid off his horse? Somebody tried to pay Ortega's cousin in Tucson to testify against you. Said you forged Knox's affidavit. Silas's jaw clenched. Who? No name. Just money. Said if they could discredit your custody claim, they could free Caldwell on appeal. Silas finally turned. And your cousin spit in their face. Wrote a letter for Judge Wilson instead. Silas nodded slowly. That means Caldwell's people are still working. Still trying to pull strings. Ramon crossed his arms. They won't stop until they think you're out of moves. Silas looked back at the house where Tomas was now leading the twins toward the corral. The boy had grown taller in the last few weeks, or maybe just heavier with purpose. I've got one more move, Silas said quietly. That afternoon, he sent Elias into town with a message for a name only a few people in the territory still remembered: Ada Delaney, a retired court clerk turned notary, the kind of woman who knew every trick used to bury the truth and had made a second career digging it back up. She arrived the next morning, hair braided like rope riding a mule that looked just as stubborn as her face. Redford, she grunted. Heard you were either dead or drinking yourself there. Neither, ma'am, Silas said. Glad to see you. Don't butter me up. Where's the damn papers? They brought her into the dining room, cleared the table, and unrolled everything they had. Original deeds, the forged orders Caldwell used. Judge Knox's handwritten confession, and the new documents Judge Wilson had filed in Flagstaff. Ada studied them all with the eye of someone who'd watched entire counties shift hands on a signature. You want this cleaned? She asked, holding up the tangled mess of conflicting land claims. I want it airtight, Silas said. She nodded once. It'll cost you. How much? 2 pounds of bacon, a dry bed, and someone else to shoe my mule. Silas grinned. Done. For 3 days she worked like a machine, cross-referencing titles, annotating legal notations, and writing statements that not only validated the Red Mesa deed, but formally accused Caldwell's entire syndicate of conspiracy, coercion, and perjury. By the 4th morning, she set down her pen and said, Paper can burn. But records filed right, they haunt people. Silas read the final packet twice. This enough to hold in court. Ada shrugged. It's enough to burn down a courthouse if they try to ignore it. With her notarized bundle in hand, Silas and Lena rode back to Flagstaff, just the two of them this time. No guards, no backup, no press. Just the truth in a satchel and a storm in the sky. The courthouse clerk greeted them with a tight smile and accepted the new evidence. By noon, Judge Wilson called an emergency hearing. In a quiet chamber lit by oil lamps and stormlight through stained windows, the judge reviewed Ada's filings, compared them against the land records, and read aloud the legal acknowledgement. The Red Mesa property belongs solely to the Gutierrez family, held in trust by Silas Redford until they reach legal age. All prior seizures and forged orders are officially vacated. Lena squeezed Silas's hand beneath the table. But the judge wasn't done. Furthermore, Wilson continued a formal investigation into Caldwell's associates will commence immediately. Arrest warrants for Albert Trigg. Marion Holt and Clay Redding are being issued as of this moment. Silas felt the weight begin to lift. Not completely, but enough. After the hearing, Wilson met them in her office. You've done more than reclaim land, she said. You've exposed a network most people assumed was just the way things worked. I didn't come here to make a point, Silas said. I just didn't want to bury any more people. Wilson poured herself a finger of bourbon and offered the bottle. He declined. To peace, then, she said. To justice, Lena replied. They rode back to Red Mesa in silence, the rain finally falling as the ridge came into view. The ranch was still there. So was Ramon. So were Elias, Tomas, and the twins. And waiting by the fence, holding a newspaper still damp from the rain, was a telegraph boy. He handed Silas the folded paper. Arizona, Sentinel Caldwell's empire crumbles under perjury scandal. Below it, a photo of Silas hat low standing in front of the courthouse steps. He handed the paper to Tomas, who stared at it, then up at Silas. "You're famous now." Silas shrugged. "That or wanted in 4 counties. They all laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. But that night, Silas stayed up long after the fire died. Not out of fear, but because he could finally feel the weight of it. The lives, the land, the lies undone. And somewhere in that quiet, he whispered the truth to the dark. We didn't just survive. We changed the story. The morning after the storm, Red Mesa woke in golden silence. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but earned. The rain had washed the dust from the trees, cleared the ash from the roof, and left puddles along the path to the barn, where the air now smelled like wet cedar and hope. A faint wind stirred the porch chimes, soft, steady, like a breath the land had been holding too long. Silas Redford sat on the back steps of the ranch house, a tin mug of coffee cooling in his hands. He watched Tomas chase the twins around the chicken coop, their laughter rising like smoke into the wide morning sky. The boy had changed. They all had. Tomas ran like he'd never been hunted, shouted like no one would silence him, and smiled like someone who believed in safety again. His little brother and sister, still clumsy, still full of trouble, had begun to sleep through the night without waking up screaming. They called Lena Auntie now, and her face always softened when they did. Elias came around the side of the house, sleeves rolled, holding a folded newspaper in one hand. His limp was better now, the kind of wound that reminds you you're still alive. They printed the follow-up, he said, handing Silas the paper. Silas unfolded it, scanned the bold headline, "Federal Court Upholds Gutierrez Custody and Land Rights." Caldwell Associates indicted beneath it. A smaller photo. Not of Silas this time, but of Lena standing with Judge Wilson and the homesteaders who had filed new claims to the lands Caldwell had stolen. Silas chuckled. "She's gonna hate that picture." "She already does," Elias said with a grin. "Tried to bribe the telegraph boy to steal every copy." Silas kept reading. Judge Wilson had issued permanent protective status over Red Mesa Ranch, designating it as a historic land trust tied to the Gutierrez children's inheritance. Any attempts to seize, develop, or alter the property without direct approval from the trust would now be a federal crime. The twins would never lose their home again. It didn't undo the past, but it gave the future a fighting chance. From inside the house, Lena's voice rang out. "Breakfast or bullets, boys? Come sit down before I throw the biscuits to the chickens." Elias smirked. "She's back to normal." "Normal for her," Silas said. They walked in together. The kitchen smelled like real life. Bacon bread, a little too much pepper in the eggs. Ramon sat at the far end of the table with a letter in front of him, sealed with the crest of the territorial marshal's office. "They offered me a post in Prescott," he said, as the others took their seats. "Said they want honest men running things now." "You gonna take it?" Lena asked. Ramon shrugged. "I might, but not right away. I've still got some repairs to make around here." Everyone knew what that meant. Ramon wasn't just fixing broken hinges or painting the barn. He was fixing trust, belonging, the slow work of helping people believe they weren't alone anymore. Thomas passed the twins their cups of milk like he'd done it 100 times. One of them knocked hers over, and instead of snapping, he just laughed and cleaned it up. Silas watched that and felt something in his chest move, not ache, not break. Just shift. He remembered the first night they arrived. Tomas dragging those babies through the snow with a makeshift sled, and a look in his eyes that said he didn't believe in rescue anymore. Back then, the boy didn't trust anyone who hadn't bled for him first. Now he was smiling, open, still alert, but no longer afraid of being still. After breakfast, they all drifted into their chores. Elias to the fence, Lena to her ledger, Ramon out riding the boundary, and Silas to the pasture where the horses had gathered under the cottonwoods, heads bowed like old men trading stories. He saddled his gelding not because he had anywhere to go, but because riding had become something different now. Not escape, not pursuit. Just rhythm, breath, time. From the ridge he looked out over the land. Green was coming back. The grass would be late this season, but it would come. The ash from the fire had soaked into the soil, feeding it. That's how life worked out here. Even ruin had a role to play. He pulled the reins and let the horse walk the edge of the north line. Fence posts held. No signs of riders. Just the wind, the sky, the steady sound of hooves on wet dirt. By midday, he rode back down and saw someone waiting by the gate. A young man, maybe 18, had too big coat, too clean. Nervous but not twitchy. "You Silas Redford?" the boy asked. Silas nodded. The kid handed him a sealed envelope. "Letter from Judge Wilson. Said you'd want to read it yourself." He rode off before Silas could ask anything else. Back on the porch, Silas sat down and opened it. The letter was short, "Mr. Redford. The court extends its gratitude for your testimony, persistence, and moral clarity. In light of your actions and the trust you've rebuilt in this territory, the regional court invites you to serve as legal guardian to the Gutierrez children under full recognition of the territory and federal oversight. Enclosed are official papers for your signature. Some people run from what they've lost. You ran toward what could still be saved. That is the definition of justice. With respect, Judge Martha Wilson Huiles folded the letter slowly. For a moment he just stared at the horizon. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just breathed. Later that evening, he sat with Tomas by the porch rail. The twins were asleep. Lena and Ramon played cards at the kitchen table. The night sky stretched endless above them. "You ever think about leaving?" Tomas asked. Silas looked over. "Used to." "Why didn't you?" Silas thought about it. The snow, the fire, the fight, the courtroom, the laughter at breakfast, the sound of kids running without fear. Finally he said, "Because some places aren't meant to be run from. They're meant to be stood for." Tomas nodded as if he already knew that. Then he leaned his head back and stared at the stars. The ranch creaked softly in the night breeze. A windmill turned. A dog barked once, then settled. And in that stillness, Red Mesa rested not in fear, but in strength. Not because it was untouched, but because it had been fought for and won. Not every Western ends in a blaze of gunfire. Some end in something stronger. A home rebuilt, a truth restored, a boy who lived, and a man who stayed.